You stop being an asset to this family the day you stop mattering to it, Nessa. Griffin Drexel said it clearly, without hesitation, standing in the front hall of Aldermere House, while his mother watched from the staircase, like a woman collecting a debt she had long been owed. Griffin Drexel, 44-year-old chief of orthopedic surgery at Stonebridge Medical Center and the public face of Drexel Medical Partners, held a sealed document envelope against his chest. Beside him stood Odile Drexel, 69-year-old widow, mother of Griffin, and the woman who had managed the Drexel Family Foundation for 2 decades with an iron grip disguised as grace. She was very still, very composed, with the expression of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times before it became real. Zadie Thorne, 33-year-old strategy consultant, hired by Drexel Medical Partners 6 months earlier, stood near the foot of the stairs wearing a dress the color of pale champagne. She had arrived that evening carrying a binder of expansion proposals and the quiet certainty of a woman who knew exactly where she stood in this house and intended to remain there. On the side table near the entry mirror sat a small garnet brooch. It had belonged to Nessa's mother, passed to Nessa at 18 with the instruction that it was to be worn only when she needed to feel steady. Nessa had worn it to every hard meeting, every difficult morning she had driven to Stonebridge alone to fix something Griffin had left broken. It was the one thing in that house that belonged entirely to her. Zadie reached out and pinned it to her own lapel while Nessa was still standing there. She did not ask permission. She smiled and said, "Beautiful piece. Old family, right?" Nessa did not answer. She looked at Griffin instead. He looked at the floor. That was the answer. Nessa Vale Drexel, 37-year-old wife of Griffin and the daughter of the late Edmund Vale, stood in that hall with 12 years reduced to one moment. She had spent those years managing the parts of Griffin's life that he was too proud to admit needed managing. The foundation gala logistics he forgot, the department funding shortfalls. She quietly covered through charitable channels, the donor relationships he neglected until they became crises, the hospital board members. She charmed into patience when Griffin's expansion ambitions outpaced his budgets. She had done all of it without ever putting her name beside his on the plaque. Griffin straightened. "The papers will be filed tomorrow. I'd ask you to be reasonable." Nessa looked at Odile, at the small, careful pleasure in her eyes. She understood then that this had not been Griffin's idea alone. It had been arranged, the kind of arrangement that needed a lawyer on retainer and a consultant positioned in the right seat before the conversation even began. "You can take what you came with," Odile said, addressing the air beside Nessa rather than Nessa herself. "The house belongs to the Drexel Estate Trust." Nessa picked up her bag. She looked one final time at the garnet brooch on Zadie's lapel. Then she walked out. But Griffin Drexel did not know the truth. He did not know that Nessa controlled Vale Capital Partners, the private investment trust established by her father before their marriage and protected under premarital documents Griffin had signed without reading past the first page. He did not know that Vale Capital held a majority beneficial interest in Meridian Health Group, the parent company that funded Stonebridge Medical Center's operating lines, its surgical wing expansion loan, and 3 facility leases currently structured under his name. He did not know that the quiet wife his mother called decorative had been through the trust, the silent financial spine holding his hospital's ambitions upright for the better part of a decade. He did not know that the day his attorneys drafted the divorce settlement, they would include one sentence that would open every door. He had called her passive. He had called her peripheral. He had told people, in the way powerful men told people, things they believed made them look decisive, that Nessa had never understood the scale of what he was building. He had never considered that the woman who stepped aside when important men entered a room might have done so because she had already decided, long before they arrived, what she owned. 12 years earlier, the evening before her wedding, Edmund Vale had sat with Nessa in the library of their family home and placed a manila envelope on the table between them. He was already sick by then, though he had not said so. His voice was deliberate in the way it always was when he was teaching her something he believed she would need. "The trust is yours," he said. "Not his, not the family's, yours. It is structured so that your name stays behind the entity. If a man loves you, that arrangement will never matter. If he does not, it will matter a great deal." Nessa had thought he was being old-fashioned, protective in the way fathers were when daughters married men they were not entirely certain of. She had not imagined, sitting in that library, that Edmund would be gone within 2 years, that Griffin would sign the disclosure documents quickly and with a small laugh, calling the trust language legalese for a charity account, that she would spend the next decade watching him grow proud in the way men did when they forgot what was holding them up. At Stonebridge, she had watched the forgetting happen in small increments. Griffin claimed credit for the foundation grant that Tessa had written half of. He took the stage at donor events while she sat 3 chairs down, feeding him answers under her breath for questions he didn't know he had. When the orthopedics billing system had an error that threatened a malpractice review, Nessa spent 4 quiet evenings at the hospital going through the records until she found the correction. Griffin announced the resolution at the next department meeting and accepted handshakes all around. That was the life she had built inside his. Not because she lacked confidence, because she had believed for a long time that love meant keeping score only when it mattered, and that the scoreboard would eventually balance itself. It had not. Emmett Crane, 61-year-old senior administrator of the Drexel Family Foundation, and one of the few people who had watched Nessa work without ever expecting her gratitude, met her at the door of her hotel room the following morning with a legal folder and a thermos of coffee. He had driven 40 minutes in the rain without mentioning it. "You should have called me last night," he said. "There was nothing to say last night," Nessa answered. "Now there is." She showed him the divorce settlement. He read it without speaking. When he reached the 3rd page, his hand stopped. There was a clause. It required Nessa to acknowledge in writing that she held no direct or indirect interest in any healthcare investment entity connected to Griffin Drexel's professional partnerships or funding obligations. Emmett looked up slowly. Did Griffin write this himself? His attorney did, Nessa said, but someone told the attorney what to ask for. Emmett set the folder down with great care. Then they know. "They're afraid," Nessa said. "There's a difference." She called Blythe Strand, 51-year-old private litigation attorney, and the woman Edmund Vale had once described as the most precise legal mind he had ever been relieved to have on his side. Blythe arrived that afternoon with a leather briefcase and the kind of composure that came only from having seen very bad situations resolve clearly, because someone had been careful about the record. She read the settlement in 14 minutes. "This isn't a divorce agreement," she said, without looking up. "This is a gag order dressed as a property settlement." She placed one finger on the investment clause. "Someone is trying to seal a room before you can walk into it." Nessa sat across from her. "They want me gone before the hospital's financing review. Then we make sure every attempt at removal is documented." Blythe opened her legal pad. "Full disclosure. Everything connected to the trust, the hospital's funding lines, any document with your name on it or your father's entity behind it. If they've laid a trap, I need to see which wire they expect you to step on." Nessa opened her secure tablet. The screen displayed Vale Capital Partners, controlling beneficiary, Nessa Vale Drexel. Blythe went very still. "Griffin doesn't understand the full structure," Nessa said. "He knows my father founded the trust. He assumed it was wound down after he died." "Was it?" "It was restructured," Nessa said quietly, "to survive exactly this." Within 24 hours, Blythe issued a preservation notice to Griffin's corporate attorneys, to the Drexel Foundation Board, to Stonebridge's administrative offices, and to every department that had handled the expansion loan documentation, every record, every communication, every email that had moved between Griffin's office and Meridian Health Group's account management team. Nessa called Lane Merritt, 45-year-old chief risk officer at Meridian Health Group, the one executive within the organization who understood the full architecture of the Vale Capital Trust and what it meant for the institution. Lane answered on the second ring. "I know why you're calling." "Then you've seen the file," Nessa said. "The expansion renewal has been on my desk for 3 weeks." Lane's voice was measured and taut. "Drexel Medical Partners submitted documents with collateral representations that do not match our independent appraisals. Compliance has also flagged signatures on 3 board approval forms." Nessa moved to the window. "What kind of flags?" "The kind that require outside counsel." A pause. "There is also a memo in the file from the CFO's office requesting that the spousal review component be deferred until after the renewal was processed." The room felt very still. Nessa had built a wall between her trust and Griffin's hospital for 10 years. She had recused herself from every vote that touched his funding because she wanted the record unimpeachable. She had done it not to protect Griffin. She had done it to protect the institution, so that if the record ever had to speak against him, no one could say it was personal. "Convene an independent review," she said. "Compliance outside counsel risk committee. I will submit a conflict disclosure and step back from any direct decision, but the review proceeds." A pause. "Understood, Chairwoman Vale." The next morning, Emmett appeared at her door with a cloth envelope. He had spent the previous day at the hospital, moving through the corridors the way he always did, unhurried and thorough. Inside the envelope were scanned expense reports, Drexel Medical Partners accounts, line items coded under practice development and donor engagement. Zadie Thorne's name appeared on 9 of them. Hotel stays in 2 cities labeled as site assessments. A tailored wardrobe approved as board presentation preparation. Private transportation logged as donor event logistics. And at the bottom of the stack, a renovation invoice for a private residence in the city listed as a satellite consultation suite. Emmett had verified the address. It was not a consultation suite. Cora Nile, 57-year-old executive coordinator for the Drexel Foundation and a woman who had quietly kept Nessa's charitable contributions in the record for years, had copied the files before the archive reorganization order came through. She had done it alone, at night, after the building emptied. When Nessa saw Cora's handwriting on the folder tab, she had to look away for a moment. The preliminary settlement meeting took place in a rented conference room. Griffin arrived with his attorney, Royce Page, 53, a family law partner, who specialized in making asset protection sound like reasonableness. Odile seated herself without being invited and arranged her expression into something that resembled patience but was actually contempt with better posture. Zadie arrived last, wearing the garnet brooch. Griffin slid a settlement copy across the table. "We can resolve this quickly, Nessa. You were a spouse, not a business partner. The agreement should reflect that reality." Nessa set her father's fountain pen on the table. She had carried it out of Aldermere House in her coat pocket the night they told her to leave. It was a small thing, but it was one of his, and she had taken it because some things needed to make the trip. Blythe pushed the papers back untouched. "My client declines." Royce frowned. "This is a generous offer." "Then it should survive scrutiny," Blythe said. She looked at Griffin directly. "Why does this settlement require my client to disclaim interest in healthcare investment entities?" The room shifted. Royce answered before Griffin could, standard protective language. "Standard to whom?" Blythe said. "Walk me through the precedent." Silence. Odile straightened. "Nessa has no connection to Griffin's professional operations. That clause is precautionary." "Precautionary against what?" Blythe said. No one answered. Nessa looked at Griffin across the table. She thought about the night she had sat in the Stonebridge parking structure with a corrected billing report at 11 o'clock, because the review board was meeting the next morning and Griffin hadn't caught the error. She thought about the foundation dinner where she had rewritten his opening remarks in the car, because he had not prepared. She thought about the year she covered 3 months of administrative payroll from her private account, because Griffin had restructured the payment calendar without notifying anyone, and the checks had failed. She thought about all the ways she had kept him from falling. She looked at the garnet brooch on Zadie's lapel. She said nothing, but her fingers closed around her father's pen, and something inside her that had been patient for a long time became something different. The independent review at Meridian Health Group convened 5 days later. The conference room on the executive floor was large, cold, and populated by people who were very practiced at not showing what they were thinking. Lane sat at the center of the table. Beside her was Blaine Cossett, 49-year-old senior partner of outside counsel, retained by Meridian for high-risk borrower reviews. At the far end sat Quill Darden, 57-year-old forensic document examiner, with a magnification screen already illuminated and a stack of originals arranged precisely beside her. Griffin arrived with Royce and 2 Drexel department heads. Odile came without being invited. The front desk staff had not known how to stop her. Then the door opened, and Nessa walked in. Lane stood. Every Meridian executive at the table stood. Blaine Cossett acknowledged her with a formal nod. Lane spoke for the record. "Nessa Vale Drexel is the controlling beneficiary of Vale Capital Partners, which holds majority beneficial interest in Meridian Health Group. Given that submitted loan documents include her name, her presence is required for identity verification and conflict disclosure. All credit decisions will be made by the Independent Review Committee." Griffin turned slowly. The color left his face before he managed a single word. Odile stared at Nessa with the expression of someone watching a wall they had relied on for years simply move. Royce set down his pen. Zadie sat very still, hands folded in her lap, the garnet brooch catching the light from the overhead panels. "Nessa," Griffin said. His voice was smaller than she had ever heard it. "What is this?" Nessa did not answer him the way a wife would. She walked to the chair beside Lane and sat down. Lane opened the first file. Drexel Medical Partners submitted an expansion loan renewal package that included a spousal financial acknowledgement bearing the name Nessa Vale Drexel, indicating her awareness and formal consent to the collateral structure. Quill Darden adjusted her glasses. I have examined the question signature. The letter formation does not match authenticated samples. The pen pressure is inconsistent, and the baseline angle is forced rather than natural. The crossing of the letter V, specifically, presents inverted relative to every authenticated sample in evidence. Nessa had known it the moment she saw it. The signature had looked like hers the way a photograph of a place looked like the place. Accurate enough to fool someone who had never been there. But she had signed her name 10,000 times. She knew every angle of the V, the slight hesitation before the second stroke, the way her father had taught her to write it, because he said a signature was a person's word made permanent. I never signed that document, she said for the record, steadily, without heat. No, Quill Darden confirmed, you did not. Griffin's mouth moved without producing anything useful. Lane changed the slide. The expense reports filled the screen. She read through them without expression. Hotel stays coded as site assessments, wardrobe invoices as board preparation, a private residence renovation as a consultation facility, multiple line items connected to a named retainer. The loan proceeds were designated for facility expansion. These expenditures do not reflect that purpose. Zadie did not move. Lane spoke carefully. The collateral representations submitted with the renewal also contain appraisal figures for properties attached to Aldermere House that do not align with independent current assessments. The discrepancy is material. Odile looked at the table. For the first time in 12 years, Nessa watched her have nothing left to fall back on. Griffin leaned forward. His voice had gone soft in a way it never was when he was certain. Nessa, this is still our marriage. Whatever is between us, you don't have to do this here. Nessa looked at him for a long moment. She saw the man who had stood beside her at her father's memorial service and told her she would never carry anything alone again. She had believed that so completely, she had never thought to hold it up to the light. You filed for divorce, she said, with your consultant in the room and your mother holding the door. He looked away first. Lane read the committee's recommendations without pause. Meridian Health Group would freeze all discretionary credit access pending review. The expansion renewal was declined. The questioned document would be referred to external legal counsel. All flagged expenditures would be subject to contractual breach review. Estate-backed collateral representations would undergo independent audit. Recovery proceedings would be initiated on defaulted facilities if cure conditions were not met within the prescribed period. The room was quiet for one breath, then Odile stood. This family, she began. Lane looked at her. The review applies to all borrowers equally, Mrs. Drexel. There was nothing more to say. The collapse did not happen all at once. It happened the way things that have been held together with borrowed confidence always did, gradually, then completely. Stonebridge placed the surgical wing expansion on administrative hold. 2 secondary lenders issued cross-default notices once the Meridian Review became part of the public commercial record. The donors Griffin had courted for the new wing began asking questions through their financial advisors, and the answers were not reassuring. Zadie retained her own attorney when the expense review reached her directly. She returned the garnet brooch through a paralegal 2 weeks later. It arrived in a padded envelope with no note. Nessa held it in her palm for a long time before she pinned it back to her own collar, where it had always belonged. Odile gave an interview through a family acquaintance, suggesting that Griffin had been targeted by a spouse acting from bitterness and financial dependence. The interview was polished. Nessa did not respond. Blythe filed it as an exhibit. Emmett told Nessa, on a quiet Thursday, that most of the foundation staff had known for years what she had done for them. That during the payroll failures, the ones Nessa had quietly covered from her private account so that no one would have to ask Odile for help, people had understood more than anyone had said aloud. That the ones who left Stonebridge during the collapse had done so with better references and transition packages than they would have had, because Nessa had made sure of it through the Vale Foundation before anyone thought to ask. She did not feel triumphant hearing that. She felt tired, and then she felt clear, and clarity was the better of the two. The divorce was finalized after 6 months. The court admitted the Meridian Review findings as relevant to asset division. The falsified acknowledgement remained in the record. The confidentiality clause was denied in its entirety. Blythe delivered the final order on a Tuesday morning. Nessa read it at the kitchen table with her father's fountain pen in her hand and a cup of tea that had gone cold. The word at the bottom of the last page was dissolved. 1 word for 12 years. She sat with it for a while, because endings had weight even when they were the right ones, and she had learned from her father that some things deserved to be felt before they were set down. That evening, she drove to the Meridian building after closing. The lobby was quiet. The security guard held the elevator. On the executive floor, the conference room was empty except for the long table and the chair at the head of it with the nameplate that read Vale Capital Partners, controlling interest. She sat down. Not in the chair Griffin had occupied when he leaned across the table and tried to make desperation sound like authority. Not in the one Odile had taken without being invited, or the one Royce had used to argue that accountability was actually aggression. This chair had her family's name on it. It had existed before she met Griffin Drexel. It had been here through every year she chose not to use it so the record would stay clean. It had been here the morning they handed her one bag and told her she had never mattered. She picked up her father's fountain pen. She reviewed the closing statement. She signed. Then she sat for a moment in the quiet of the room, with the city lights coming through the high windows and the pen still warm in her hand, and she allowed herself to feel exactly what the moment was. Not victory. Victory was too loud a word for what remained when betrayal was finished. What she felt was simpler and more durable than that. She felt like herself, clearly, fully, without apology, in a room that had always carried her name. Subscribe now and leave a comment below if you believe a quiet woman's patience is never weakness. Some betrayals do not break a woman who knows what she owns. They only make the moment she stands up impossible to ignore.